2020, near Sydney, metal structures are lowered to the ocean floor, and hundreds of seahorses raised in aquariums are released alongside them. Back in 2006, more than 600 animals had been recorded at this very spot. By 2015, just 10. The population had collapsed by 98%. But if a species is vanishing from the ocean, why attempt to save it with metal structures and animals that had never lived in the wild? Then something happened that almost no one had anticipated. Just 6 months after the first release, dives revealed that the animals had survived, and some of them were already pregnant. So what exactly had changed on the ocean floor? Seahorse Gardens is a patch of seabed roughly 6,000 square meters in area in Port Stephens Bay. In 2006, Harasti descended and counted the animals. He counted approximately 600 adult individuals. This was the largest known population of Hippocampus whitei in the world. To understand why that number matters, you need to understand what kind of animal this is. Hippocampus whitei grows to 16 centimeters, roughly the size of an adult's thumb. It is a weak swimmer, so weak that it cannot overcome even a moderate current. Instead, it grips the same coral or seaweed with its tail for weeks, sometimes months. In effect, it is a stationary resident of a single square meter of sea floor. When that square meter disappears, the animal does not relocate. It simply disappears along with it. At the same time, Manly, one of Sydney's suburbs. From 2007 to 2008, Harasti's PhD research documented more than 300 seahorses on the nets at Manly. After 2012, the population there collapsed, and it never recovered. Clifton Gardens, another Sydney cove, had 70 animals in 2008 and 7 in 2015. The same mathematics, a different point on the map. If you're familiar with what happened to wolves in Yellowstone, you understand this logic. When a species that occupies a very specific niche disappears from an ecosystem, the rest of the system does not simply carry on without it. It reorganizes, sometimes in a direction you did not expect. Seahorse Gardens is an underwater Yellowstone, only without the wolves, without the tourists, and without $1 billion in federal funding. And here's the second paradox. In the urbanized harbor of Sydney Harbor, these animals relocated to artificial structures, protective swimming nets. In areas where the natural coastal environment had long since become concrete and anchors, seahorses learned to live on metal. But even that was not enough to save them. When local councils routinely cleaned the nets of marine growth, populations collapsed again because the very structure that served as their home was being removed. What killed the seahorses? Not poaching or pollution. The primary cause was the disappearance of soft corals, specifically Dendronephthia australis, the cauliflower coral of the underwater world. When the corals vanished, the animals' shelter vanished with them. When the nets were removed, the seahorses vanished from Sydney. We will explain later why the idea for the hotels emerged here, and why the scientific community's initial response was decidedly cautious. In 2019, Harasti is now a senior research scientist at the Taylor's Beach Fisheries Institute, with 15 years of underwater observation and several hundred hours of data behind him. He proposes raising seahorses in aquariums and then releasing them into the wild and building artificial hotels for them. These are metal structures on the seafloor that gradually become colonized by algae, sponges, and corals, transforming into a natural habitat. The idea seemed strange for several reasons. First, seahorses are monogamous. Literally, they pair bond for years. The male carries the offspring in a specialized pouch on his abdomen. This is not salmon, which you can simply farm and release into a river. Even in captivity, they readily refuse food and die. Second, no one had previously demonstrated that aquarium-raised seahorses could survive in the open ocean. The argument existed: an animal that had never hunted independently, that had never evaded a predator, would simply die within a week of release. In similar programs for other species, Atlantic sturgeon and certain turtle species, post-release survival rates proved so low that critics questioned the point of the programs altogether. With seahorses, the problem is compounded. They are not merely weak in open water, they never actively search for food. They wait for small crustaceans to drift past. An aquarium animal accustomed to a controlled flow of feed simply does not know what to do next in the ocean. In 2022, the journal Frontiers in Marine Science published the first quantitative data from the program. Survival rates of aquarium-raised animals after 6 months in the wild on the hotels were 20 to 30%. The skeptics were right, that is a low number, but compare it against what? against 0 wild animals remaining at most monitoring sites. In that context, 20% is the only existing population, but the system thought otherwise. If survival rates are poor, it is a waste of resources. Better to protect the natural habitat than to raise animals that will die anyway. Harasti agreed halfway. Yes, protecting the habitat is essential, but he knew something the prevailing position did not account for. There is no longer any natural habitat. The corals at Seahorse Gardens were gone. The nets in Sydney Harbor were being cleaned. Waiting for the habitat to recover means waiting for the species to recover after it has already disappeared. That is not how it works. October 2019. The Sea Life Sydney Aquarium team, together with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and the University of Technology Sydney, collects 5 pairs, including pregnant males, from the protective net at Clifton Gardens in Mosman. They are transferred to a purpose-built breeding facility at the aquarium. May 2020. 90 aquarium-raised seahorses receive microscopic fluorescent tags under their skin, a unique color code for each animal, and are returned to the bay. The first release. The first real question: how many will survive beyond a month? November 2020. During the first scheduled monitoring dive, divers find something they did not expect. Some of the released animals are already pregnant. The aquarium-raised seahorses had not merely survived, they had begun reproducing in the wild. In 2021, 140 animals were released. In 2022, the program expands to Port Stephens, where new hotels are constructed. In 2023, 384 superhorses are released, raised under a special protocol for maximum size and robustness before release. In 2024, a series of releases totals more than 500 animals, including an event personally attended by Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek. In September 2025, a record single-day release at Port Stephens puts 1,200 animals into the water in one day. The cumulative count is more than 3,500 aquarium-raised hippocampus white-eye returned to the ocean since 2020. The hotels themselves are a smaller but more significant detail. Within 2 years of installation, they transform, as algae, sponges, and corals gradually cover the structure. Then, once the weight of the growth becomes sufficient, the structure collapses, leaving behind a natural reef foundation beneath it. The hotel is temporary, but what it leaves behind can persist for decades. And one more detail that is easy to miss in official reports. From the very beginning, from the first release in 2020, alongside scientists and Department of Primary Industries divers, the Game Sea Rangers participated in every action. They are indigenous sea guardians for whom Sydney Harbor is not a city harbor but Game, the country of their ancestors for thousands of years. The Game Rangers conduct their own monitoring of coastal waters and hold legally recognized management rights over these territories. Their involvement means the restoration program formally acknowledges that these waters have custodians who were here long before any aquarium. By 2024, more than 9 hotels had been installed in Sydney Harbor. Dozens more were deployed in Port Stephens, some of them partially installed by students from 15 primary schools in the Hunter region, who dived alongside Department of Primary Industries divers and attached the structures to the seafloor with their own hands. As of 2025, there are exactly 60 hotels there, across 2 sites, Pipeline and Little Beach. For comparison, in 2020, there was 1 site and 9 hotels in Sydney. In 5 years, 60 structures in a single bay. This is no longer a pilot program. It's worth pausing here, because if you are expecting me to say, and the animals recovered and everything is fine, no. Here is what actually happened, and why it is more complicated. Survival rates at Clifton Gardens, the one location where the program produced a stable result within Sydney Harbor, have been good. The animals live and reproduce. Volunteer divers document them weekly through iNaturalist, and the data confirms that numbers are growing. But then, March 2021, Port Stephens, a flood that local media described as a 1-in-100-year event. Harasti dives a few weeks later. I have never seen habitat loss on this scale. Nowhere. Ever. It was like an underwater bulldozer had gone through. I had dived this site more than 1,000 times, and I got lost because there were no landmarks left. Everything, sand. This flood changed everything. What happened underwater, fresh water from the flooding filled layers down to a depth of 8 meters. Marine flora and fauna in that zone cannot tolerate a sudden drop in salinity. Cauliflower soft coral, the primary refuge for seahorses in Port Stephens, disappeared across 95% of the estuary within a matter of weeks. At some sites, there was 100% loss of algae, sponges, and seagrass simultaneously. The habitat was gone. 2022, the next flood. It finished off what remained. Together, the two floods destroyed more than 95% of the marine habitat in the estuary over 3 years. The official figure from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. The area was destroyed. In 2025, Harasti describes simply, "Our biggest problem this year, 4 major floods. Not one event, 4 in a single year. 1,500 animals from the most recent large release were wiped out. Without the breeding program, the seahorse could simply have disappeared from Port Stephens. The repeated floods made recovery far harder. Note precisely what this is, not human negligence in any direct sense. Floods, a climate event that in 2021 was considered a once-in-a-century anomaly, and in 2025 repeated 4 times in a single season. This is the central paradox of the program. It solves one problem, the absence of a population, but does not solve another, the instability of the habitat, which is a consequence of climate change. Every new flood resets the counter. Harasti is direct. Our program is not a victory over the crisis. It is a chase after the crisis. But there is one more unexpected outcome, a positive one and equally unpredictable. The hotels began attracting far more than seahorses. Harasti documents fish that had lost their natural sponge reefs to the floods and migrated to the hotels en masse. Our hotels are one of the last refuges for marine life in Port Stephens. A lot of fish moved there because there are no longer any sponge habitats. Where there was once bare sandy seafloor, there is now the only living point in the estuary. There is one more detail that emerged after several years of observation. Harasti documented 3 pairs of hippocampus whitei that remained together for 3 consecutive breeding seasons. 3 years, the same pair, on the same hotel. Seahorses are monogamous, that much is known, but a pair raised in an aquarium, returning to the same location year after year under conditions of constant habitat destruction, is an argument against those who said aquarium animals could never survive in the wild. The hotel became a home, not a temporary shelter, a home. The skeptics said this won't solve the problem. They were right in a narrow sense. The species has not recovered, but the system has gained footholds it did not have before. Is that enough? That is a different question. January 2026, a new breeding season. Harasti and his team are once again collecting pregnant males, now in Port Stephens, where after the floods of 2022 and 2025, the population is recovering slowly and unevenly. New juveniles in the aquarium, new hotels on the sea floor. One detail that does not make it into press releases: to raise a super horse, the team keeps juveniles in the aquarium 4 times longer than usual, 4 months instead of 1 month. Round-the-clock care, a specialized diet, and controlled temperature. The goal is for the animal to reach maximum size and robustness before it ever sees the ocean. The logic is straightforward. A larger animal has a better chance of surviving the first few weeks. The data confirms it. Survival rates for super horses are higher than for standard releases, but each such cohort represents 4 months of work for the sake of a few hundred animals. Since 2023, amateur divers across Sydney have joined the program through iNaturalist, the same platform that American birdwatchers use for eBird or Merlin. Each week, dozens of people dive, photograph tagged animals, and upload the data. Without them, researchers would not have sufficient coverage to assess survival rates, too many sites, too few full-time scientists. Citizen science closed a gap that the budget could not. And one question that still has no answer: how many times can you restart the cycle? The program is designed to replenish the population. But if every 2 or 3 years a flood arrives and destroys the results, this is a system for maintaining survival at a minimum threshold. That is the difference between treatment and resuscitation. Harasti knows this better than anyone. He saw Seahorse Gardens in 2006, 600 animals across 6,000 square meters. He saw it in 2015, 10 animals. He witnessed the underwater bulldozer in 2022 and 2025, and he comes back every year. January 2026. Harasti comments on the new cohort in the aquarium. Everything died in the shallows. Only now are we beginning to see microalgae appearing on the seafloor again. Microalgae, that is the first step. Getting back to the state of 2006 will take years, if not decades. Somewhere 200 kilometers south of Port Stevens, there are several more harbors where Hippocampus whitey once lived, and where there is still no breeding program, no hotels, just sand and silence.